So I'm jumping to a work I made. I can never remember the dates of anything. So anyway, it's a work I made long after I started out as an artist, a work called Ascension. I discovered somewhere along the process of making my work that one of the things I was interested in was the non-object, the object which is not. For every material thing, there's an immaterial equivalent, and I tumbled into it. Now, this is an object made out of a non-material. It's a theatrical smoke in a space that causes the air to spin, and it forms an object. So it's an object made of a non-object. I'm interested in that as a possibility. I was just in the desert recently, and of course I've just read you Levinas. Levinas's great thing was the idea of the monad. You know, he was a Jewish philosopher. The monad, the singular, the original thing. In the desert, there's something that happens. There's a kind of monadic moment. It's not surprising that Moses led them for 40 years. I suspect he followed one of these, a tornado or something like it, a spirit of something that's profoundly mysterious, that's profoundly singular, and has that is thing about it. Every mountain has that, of course. So, you know, unreservedly high ambition. I think it's not worth doing what I do if you don't have a high ambition. The doctors in this room will know that it's okay to be a reasonable doctor. What's the point of being a reasonable artist? Waste of time. Can't do any good to anybody. So, I'm going to show you one other project, which is not something that's happened. It's something that might happen. I like models. I like the idea of a very big scale. So this thing is, I don't know, 150, maybe a bit more than 150 meters long, made of steel. The idea is that it's made of steel. And I'm interested in forms that have necks, because you can never read the form. The idea is that they should be in a small space, and sort of it's like a piece of rubber, really. So it's, yeah, okay, a long, narrow building, this sort of rubbery form. And then you go inside it. And there's a very, very long walkway that eventually leads you to this bridge hanging in space. For the last 5 years, I've been working with a nanotechnology guy we've been trying to make the blackest material in the universe. So I promise you, we've succeeded. It absorbs 98.8% of all light, or 99 point whatever it is, percent of all light. Anyway, it's the blackest material in the universe after a black hole, and it is profoundly black. Now, I'm showing you this only because the idea is that we're going to coat the interior of this space, and I should maybe go back one. So there we are. That's the object, and you walk into it, and this kind of nodule at the end has this interior space, and it's black. You're hovering in the middle of this darkness. Why do I show you this? Because it's fundamental to everything that I'm trying to think about, which is that the interior is bigger. So what's inside the object, it's a very big object, but what's inside is bigger than what's outside. And I think that's how we are. We are bigger inside. And I think that sense of the way we occupy ourselves, that we kind of have this thing that is this is, but what's inside it has a completely other imaginative reality, and we all know that. So there's no darkness like the darkness we know within. There's no space like the space we know within. And I think that sense of tumbling out and in Reversing inside and outside is one of the things that I've come to over the years. So this is where I started. This is a work, a sketch, a playful sketch of a hermaphroditic body on the ground, identified in a very simple way with male and female forms. This is something I made as an art student. It's a way of thinking about the possibility that form is negative and positive. In other words, day and night, male and female, and all those opposite things that we live with. Another thing that suddenly appears and reappears for me. I then went through a process of looking for materials to work with, and the first one was pigment. These are, in a sense, like icebergs, somewhat emerged in the ground, or somewhat revealed and mostly below the ground, below the surface of the ground, poking out into consciousness, something other, somewhere else. So I'm slowly beginning here. This is the late 70s, 78 or 79, trying to understand what does it mean? What does it mean to make an object? I can't do that in my head. What I know is that I'm not clever enough. I can't do it in my head. I have to do it in the studio. The studio is a place to think, a place to be, a place to excavate. The other thing I think I know is that the work doesn't stop when the object is made. That in fact, that's half the work. The rest of the work is watching it. Just watch it and see what it can reveal. Can it tell me about what is, or can it tell me about what is not? In other words, as Levinas says, the rest of the object's in darkness, hidden below, somewhere below the ground. So it's just showing a little part of itself. All fiction, complete lies. And that's what I like about it. Because who said, when I was making these in the late 70s and early 80s, the great thing was truth to materials. All sculptors made, if you make a thing, it has to be what it says it is. Phooey, I say. Art is all about illusion, all about untruth. Isn't it in untruth that we know ourselves most deeply? So I suggest that all the fictions, all the things that we educate ourselves to know are to be questioned, at least, if not untrue. I continued to explore these ideas in a series of works called 1,000 Names. I wanted them to have a kind of generic notion. 1,000 is a symbolic number that it might be 1 million or 10 million or 100 million, whatever. Anyway, I slowly began to form a kind of language. I made a trip, this is in '81, I made a trip to Japan and discovered for the first time a Japanese garden and thought to myself, what an extraordinary reality that somehow this deeply aesthetic world has a poignancy that seems always to refer to a body of knowledge that's somewhere else. You've got to have read the poem or know the story or know the bit of mythology that the garden refers to, otherwise it's meaningless, it's just a stone. But of course it's never just a stone. So this is a work called As If to Celebrate, I Discovered a Mountain Blooming with Red Flowers. I'm Indian, in case you didn't notice. I'm really not interested in being an Indian artist, though. But I am interested in some things that emerge out of a cultural background. I'm Indian, I'm Jewish, I'm confused, and whatever else, all that stuff. But the point is that none of them are relevant. None of them are really relevant, except that one can't get away from certain things. There's a certain something about the ritual matter in culture. For me, it's red. These things are laid out. Maybe I referred to a garden, but they're also laid out like a ritual space where some magical God knows what is about to happen, and it's a lot of housework. Got to keep it incredibly clean and make sure that the pigment goes just where it goes and nowhere else. So it's a sort of acting out of a process. I'm interested in that process. So ritual matters. Please, I keep coming back to the idea that most of the objects hidden, even though these are very much present, most of them is underground. Anyway, slowly, I began to feel that there was a problem here, and the problem was composition. I'm not really interested in composition. I didn't want to make a group of things that were all kind of in a nice relationship with each other. Phooey. I always hated Anthony Cairo for exactly that reason. He's a great artist, but oops, sorry, forgive me, look. No, but I think it's important for me, this idea that there's something beyond composition. That we have to get beyond what David Smith did and beyond what Anthony Cairo did and of course, many others. Judd discovered something really important, which is that you can make art that's singular, that just has one thing, one moment, it's full, complete, and there. And I think that's what I was looking for. But I knew that there were parts of this that I could be leading in that direction, and yet I wasn't doing it. So the objects began to turn inwards. This is a work called Mother as a Mountain. I'm deeply interested in motherhood, of course, which maybe is singular. Sorry, the next slide is out of order. I mean, it's in the wrong place, but anyway, forgive me. And then to the work that Jim came to look at. So I'd made those pigment pieces with lots of things in them, and I had a show in New York, and it all went terribly well, and I thought, oh God, is this what it means? I don't want to do this anymore. And I had a year of really not making very much work and not understanding what I wanted to do as an artist. And so I decided to empty it all out, and I literally emptied it all out. So I made a bowl. I'd never really used blue before. I'd made one or two pigment works in blue, but not this kind of blue. And then there was always the looming, Yves Klein. Oh God, you can't go near blue. Yves Klein did it. It's a much darker blue than Yves Klein ever used, by the way. But it's also not about blue. One of the things about this kind of blue is that that your eyes can't see it. It's just a phenomenological truth that you can't fully focus on this kind of blue. And I began to understand that what I was really after was that mother thing, darkness. If the Platonic truth is that we sat in the cave looking out at the light, then there's a much more interesting reality, which is the one that looks backwards at the darkness. Maybe that's deeper, more dangerous. And of course, after Freud, we know that it's unavoidable, that we can't do anything else. We've got to look at the darkness. So I thought I might try and see if I could investigate this darkness. What does it mean to make an object that's really not an object? One of the things that the pigment pieces point to is that pigment is a kind of ephemeral non-material, and yet I was making objects out of it. Half those objects are not really made of pigment, but who knows? You couldn't tell me which ones, I'm sure. As I say, lies and fiction are always accompaniment of this whole story. I feel it's terribly important. So, darkness. I've been in psychoanalysis for forever, as is more than obvious by now. So I felt I needed to investigate this. What is this darkness? What am I looking at? What am I thinking about? And I wondered how it was possible to make really dark works, objects that are not objects. So I began to coin for myself the notion of the non-object, of, if you like, the immaterial equivalent of material. What is it? Henry Moore had gone to the notion that an object might have a hole in it. Coy. Not enough to my mind. I felt somehow one had to go the next step. What is the next step? And I felt this might be the work. It's a work called Adam. Adam, meaning you stand a stone, I allowed myself to go down this route and do the thing that, that sculptors always want to do, is deal with mass and weight. So I went to a quarry and, struggled to make some, I won't show you the earlier works, but whatever. Struggled to deal with this material, to be a carver. I don't know how to carve a piece of stone. So I found somebody who could help me, and we carved a piece of stone. What we did was carve out the interior. So we stood the block up, immediately it becomes human. We carved out the interior, and I covered it in blue pigment. It had an immaterial. It's as if, when you see this work for real, and it's hard to see in a photograph, that rectangle of blue sits right up on the surface. I mean, I'm going to go back one, if I may. These are not painted objects. These are spaces full of darkness. That's what I'm interested in. So space plays a role. Much as in the earlier pigment works, it's the way the object lived in space and had invisible space below the ground. Anyway, I shall go on. And then I, carried on with this and looked at what I could explore with voided objects. And then I made this work, which is a group of, I forget, I can't remember how many stones. Anyway, a lot of stones, each of which weighs probably about 4 or 5 tons, and we excavated them with huge effort in order to just reveal a little spot that with a very, very friable, thin edge, so a void stone, void field. It's as if it contained that dark space that I felt I was looking for, between material and immaterial. I wondered then if it was possible to do the opposite, to use the surface of an object to turn the project around the other way. And this is a work called Dragon, made with Chinese riverbed stones that are just painted blue. I mean, they are huge. They don't look so huge here, but they are huge and very heavy. But just that little layer of pigment turned them into something else. They became weightless. It's as if, at least metaphorically, they emerged from somewhere else. Anyway, let's move on. I began to wonder then further about the non-object. Could architecture be a non-object? Is it possible that the self, as it lives in a building, can mark it with just the first sign and point to body without needing to do any more. And of course, this is a gash in an empty gallery. Yes, and we know the Italian equivalent. So what? I then made a building, a work called Descent into Limbo. There's a wonderful work by Mantegna, which I don't have an image of, in which it's an image of Christ as he descends into limbo, and he's holding his hand out like that, and he's at the edge of a cave, about to descend into the darkness of the self, inevitably. It's a descent into something interior. So I made this, which is a very, very dark, deep, dangerous void. It looked like a black carpet. So, you make a room. This was Documenta some year or the other, I can't remember which. And you make a room, close the door, and of course there's a queue. So there's an enormous queue. People stand and wait and patiently. Anyway, eventually, after waiting for an hour, this man, there was one of the people guarding the piece told me this story. He came into the room and he said, "Oh, I've done a lot of things in the name of contemporary art, but never have I stood in line to look at a black carpet." For an hour, a black carpet. And then he took his glasses off and threw them at the work. He was furious. And of course, they went down the hole. Terrified. He was terrified and stood against the wall, or so the story goes. Anyway, from my perspective, complete success. So, no, quite seriously though, it's a space full of darkness. That's what I'm after. In a real world, to make something that isn't. I think that's worth living for. Sometimes. Anyway, I explored it a little further in different ways. I began to feel that all these conventional ideas about space are problematic for me. I say these things. I didn't think them like this. They emerge out of working. But I realized that if I was going to take seriously the idea of both the non-object and the idea that darkness matters, then the implication in space terms is that it can't be Brancusi. It's not onward and upward. It's not the rocket. It's not phallic, in other words. That space turns inwards. The implication is that space must turn inwards. And so this involution began to be part of a language that I felt could be one of the possible next steps for me. So I began to explore it. It's a room with an involuted floor, and then a work called My Body, Your Body, which is a void in the wall with this involuted thing. But I was really interested in color. I was interested in the idea that color could do this dark thing, this new thing with space. And how do you use color? I'm a sculptor. I'm not really a painter. Anyway, I struggle with it. So I decided that what I'd try and do is make a horizon, an endless horizon. So I hung a form from a big form. It's about 8 meters in diameter from the ceiling, and you walk underneath it, and it feels as if it's raining red as if the red is coming down. So I'm interested in, as was in this little piece by Levinas, in this condition of color that isn't, it isn't an application. It's a state of being. It is. So it is red. Or it is yellow. I then made one of the most incredible trips of my life. I went to Australia. Go if you have a chance. And in the center of Australia is a place called Ayers Rock. I was deeply inspired by it as a geological truth that is both physical and real, and always unreal. Always, it's as if this huge monument is, this huge edifice is hollow and not present. I wondered if I could make such an object, truly, again and again, of course. So I wrote in my sketchbook a white bump on a white wall. So I made a white bump on a white wall, and of course it was a pregnant bump. And I decided to call it When I'm Pregnant. So when I'm pregnant with that thing that doesn't exist. I don't know how well that looks there, but when you stand in front of it, it's a fuzz on the wall. And from the side, it's like that. So there it is, When I'm Pregnant. So, I'd done all these works, and then I wondered what I was going to do next. And I wondered if it was possible to make a mirror void. So I tried a mirror void. It's a negative bowl with a mirror interior, and I wondered again, of course, if it could be a space full of mirror. So I think it's a space full of mirror. Concavity has a curious history. Mirrored objects, many of my colleagues, some of my colleagues have made convex mirror objects. Convex objects, camouflage them themselves in the space. They are, in a sense, there and not there, like all mirrored things. But concave mirrored things do very weird things. They turn the world upside down. Their space is not the space of painting. Their space is a space in front of painting. What do I mean by that? The traditional space of painting, there's the object, and you look at the painting, and it's the space beyond it that one might call the traditional sublime. This sublime, the mirror sublime, is in front of the picture plane. It's not behind it. And concavity does that in a way that's fascinating. Because it has a focus, because it has a point in space, it's as if when you cross that point of space, the world is turning upside down again. The world is turning inside out. And you're marking a moment of transition. And it's of course optical. It's a complete game. So it's an idea I explored in different ways. With a work called Vertigo here, a sheet of steel standing with a concave mirrored shape, S-curve, and C-curve. At the Louvre, yeah, and then this, the Bean in Chicago. Oh, they were so courageous in Chicago to take me on when I'd never really made a big outdoor work before. And of course, inevitably, with all these things, it's the belief of one man or one woman who makes a thing like this happen. Anyway, bless those great citizens of Chicago. So what I wanted to do was to make something that sat in Millennium Park, as it does, draw in the sky and all that, and then with this space on the inside that drew you in the same way. When I first went to look at the Bean, Cloudgate as I call it, I was confused by it because it's very, very popular, as you saw in that previous picture. Lots of people there, and I thought, oh God, is this just Disneyland? Am I just doing Disney? Am I just making entertainment, in other words? And I went and looked at it and pondered the question. It's a difficult question for an artist to ask them, for anyone to ask themselves, but I think especially when you take yourself as seriously as I do. And I decided, after being there for a little while, that there is something mysterious about it, and its scale. That because it has no joints, because you can't read this thing as having any human association from the point of view of how big it is, it has no scale. It's very big and very small. It depends on where you are. And I felt that that was just mysterious enough to keep away from Disney, from entertainment, in other words. And I think people know that. I mean, one knows that. You go there and you know it. Scale is the most profoundly poetic, deeply important thing, which I will talk about some more later. This is a work called Sky Mirror. So, of course, concavity in all sorts of ways, and I thought about putting a big concave mirror outside, sky mirror, and then at rock center, sky mirror again. Anyway, so I slowly begin to evolve different sorts of languages. I realized that the language of the non-object could have other forms. I was invited to look at this space of an emptied-out shell of a building that's now the Baltic Center for Contemporary Art in somewhere in the north of England. I can't remember where. Newcastle, there you go, exactly. And it was the shell of the building, and I decided to join the two ends of the building together with this big tube. And it did the weirdest thing. When you stood at this end, it's as if, because the tube narrows in the middle, it foreshortens the building. The building, it's a great enormous building, became half size. And then you went in, and it suddenly became full size. So there was this curious, mysterious thing about scale. No model ever told me that. No, I only discovered it on site. And I think that's the risk we take as artists. That's the risk we put to ourselves continually. There's no R&D, there's no time or money to check out these things. One has to do them and live them. And that takes a little bit of courage. But it's terribly important. It's the only way. We conduct our educations in public. It's the only way it can be done. So this is a work called Marcius, which I showed at the Tate, the Turbine Hall at the Tate. 3 rings stretched across. I was interested in the idea that you could never see the whole object, and that you could only have bits of it, and it was always involuting. It's a big, big thing. And scale is profound and marvelous, and I love it. I love the idea that it is a real tool of sculpture. It's as if in certain, there is certain opinion that feels that big things are not interesting things. It's wrong. I think big things are fascinating if they're right, if they get it right. So there is a kind of jaw-dropping moment of, can it really be that big? Can it really hold the scale? Isn't that something profound? Isn't that something that goes really deep in us? Isn't after all, what is art if it isn't wonder? So this is a work. It's a kind of. I'm obsessed with the idea of dismemberment. So it's a kind of dismembered object. Made in a landscape in New Zealand. You can see that what I'm referring to all the time is the body. The work is always bodily or body something. So stretching, pulling. Marsyas was flayed by Apollo. Marsyas had his skin removed. I didn't illustrate the myth. What I conceived of the idea, or rather, I thought about the space in which this work was going to go. I made a model or two, and I wondered, what on earth? What shall I call this? It needs a name. As I said, the work doesn't stop when the object is made. Naming it like a baby, naming it gives it a place in the world, a mythological place. I'm pretty convinced that artists don't make objects. We make mythological facts, realities, truths, whatever, that have emotional replay, we hope, or recall, or whatever the word is. So I think that's terribly important. Anyway, let me go on. Talk too much. Other works. So this is a much more recent work made for the exhibition in Versailles, which is looking at the idea of inside-outside, involution, an object forming itself, body. That's the inside. So I'm quite interested in this oppositeness between what is inside and what is outside. Anyway, I'll go back to relatively this sequence. This is a work called Memory. So I was asked to make a work in a space in Berlin in which it seemed to me there were two distinct ways of approaching the building. It's as if there was a door on one side that led you to this space where I decided to put this object, and then, so that's another view of the same thing from one space, and then another space, which was this thing, which was like a black window in the space, but was actually the interior of the object you'd previously seen. So I call the work Memory to try and prompt the idea that an object isn't what it seems to be, that the inside of it and the outside of it are two different things. And they may not fully relate to each other, just like we are. At least just like I am. Here's another one of these things. So this is the Grand Palais, a work called Leviathan. It's a great, enormous building, and I manipulated the viewer, because sculpture is very manipulative, but I manipulated the viewer into going into the object first. So you went into this thing, and then maybe the sun came out and it looked like that, and then you went into the space between the object and the building, which was like this. So, I'm going to go back, please, if I may, just to explain what's going on. You see these necks in the object. You see there's a neck there between the necks form these holes. So the object is narrow and then big, and they form these holes. So the inside and the outside are not the same thing. Of course, they are the same thing. This is a millimeter thick. It's a PVC. But it's because of the form that one can't read the inside and the outside is relating to each other. And of course, it's very theatrical. It's over the top. But I hope that does something. I hope that's important. Anyway, I'll move on. I'm deeply interested in color. I'm interested in what color does. I'm interested in color as ritual matter. I won't talk about that one, but I will talk about this one. This is a work called My Red Homeland. And it's my red homeland. It's red wax, oil paint mixed with wax. I felt I'd use color in various different ways, but I hadn't used it in its most traditional form, which was oil paint. So I made this big machine that it's a block that slowly moves through the object, just slowly churns like that, moves very slow. So somewhere between a kind of geology and a kind of biology. One can't look at color without associative realities. And when it's red like this, then it's all the things you know. So I continue to explore this in different ways. This is a group of objects that are based on the principle, the very old idea of sculpture, that you take a two-dimensional form, a two-dimensional diagram, and move it through space, and it becomes a three-dimensional thing. So these are all objects that come out of that process. Some of them moving. Actually moving. This is a white wall that actually moves. And then I began to wonder, could one use the space in a different way? Could one use the space to make the object rather than putting an object in a space and moving something like a wall or a former or whatever? So I made this thing, which is it's as if. Yes, I'll explain. So it's a work called Swayam, which is a Sanskrit word meaning self-made or auto-generated. One of the fictions about a pigment object is that it made itself. I didn't make it. It just was there. So if one takes that really seriously, can one set up something? Of course, it's all lies. It's all fiction anyway. But can one set up a fiction that says the object made itself? So what I did was cast a block of wax and set it on rails and move it through the building. And it takes the form of the doors. It's as if the building is kind of, forgive the phrase, but shitting this thing, pushing it out, forcing it. Then where negative space becomes positive space, where the object is in transition, it's happening, it's taking place, it's in passage. If I go, to this one, I showed this at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, the building in which Hitler did whatever he did, banned anything that was progressive and forward-thinking. And of course, it immediately took on this whole other meaning. A thing, a train, I won't go into it further. But I was interested and appalled, in a way, that at the way that an object can accrue to itself this kind of deep psychic memory. Of course, I'm fascinated by it. It's what I'm after. And yet, I have no wish to illustrate anything. I have no wish to say anything particularly. Anyway, I was offered a show in a wonderful space in Vienna. And I'd sort of wondered how I could use this space. So I thought one day to myself, because many of these things are pretty stupid, I thought to myself, why not? I'll make a gun. and I'll just shoot from one end of the room to the other end of the room, and we'll see what happens. Of course, Vienna, it's where Hermann Nietzsche worked, and all the Vienna actionists. I was going to take them on somehow or the other and play their game with pellets of red stuff, of course. So I began to shoot into the corner, and suddenly something else began to happen. I realized that I was playing out a very old drama, a Duchampian male-female. The corner, after all, is the foundation of architecture. The beginning, one can easily read it as feminine. And so a kind of psychodrama between these two, a bloody psychodrama. Of course, Jackson Pollock, and I dare say Goya are not far away. So I'm interested in the way that a stupid idea can have not so stupid repercussions if one's lucky. Well, we're all so well educated. You know, we're all told about how we should be and what's good and how to be a good human being and all that. That's fine, but it's not what you need as an artist. You've somehow got to you've got to de-educate yourself. You've got to go somewhere else. And it's often the stupid ideas that are the best ideas. It's not for nothing that the artist is a kind of quasi-fool who stumbles into deep truth without even knowing that he or she has gone anywhere near that. And I think that's the way it is. That's why practice matters. I go to the studio every day. I'm in practice. It's not something I do. I don't have any good ideas, really. I just work, as we all do. Sometimes maybe something happens. Anyway, this is another one of these wax pieces in which I put blocks of wax, as you can see here, on conveyor belts, and they were kind of falling. This is a work I did in a very important space in Berlin, at the Martin Gropiusbau, where Joseph Beuys had made, oh God, I can't remember the name of the work. Anyway, a fabulously important work, which I can't remember the name of. Doesn't matter. But you can't work in a space like this and not acknowledge both Berlin and Beuys. Anyway, one of the things I told myself right from the very start is that there's no hierarchy of form, that all form's good and all form works. So I began to explore different kinds of form in a series of cement works that were made with a kind of big oozing tube, like a big tube toothpaste. I slowly evolved this work, which is called Grayman Cries, Shaman Dies, or something. I love big titles, so. But it's an exploration of the possibility of form, and I still continue to make these works. So they are. Some of them architectural, and yeah, I don't need to say much. It's pretty obvious. And then came this. Anyway, I'll tell you about this. I was asked to make something for the Olympics. The Olympics came to London, and they, rather late in the day, decided that the Olympics needed some culture. And so the mayor and some good citizens had a competition to do something, and they invited me to enter it. I don't like competitions, so anyway, eventually Cecil Balmont and I, Cecil, who's a wonderful engineer, and I were invited to take it forward. And we came up with this, the brief was to make a tower. You know, I mean, the great towers of the world are all like A-forms. They're all, you know, like the Eiffel Tower. This bit leans on that bit, and they support each other. And A-forms work very well as tall structures. We wanted to see if we could do something which was not an A-form. So coming out of these works, these cement informal works, I wondered if it was possible to make a kind of free flow of form. So anyway, the work has, this object, you know, anyway, sorry. I'm lamenting the thought that they now call it a visitor attraction. And Boris, our great mayor of London, in his wisdom, came to me the other day, or called me up the other day and said, Anish, I think we should put a slide down it. Yeah, I'm serious. It'll be the tallest slide in the world. And I thought to myself, Boris, shall we go to war? You know, I'll be the author, and you can be the so-called Philistine, and let's go to war. And then my young son who's here said, Dad, don't do it. Don't do it. So I thought, yes, he's right. I won't do it. And I decided that okay, he wants to make a slide. Let's make a slide. So I invited Carsten Holler to come and make a slide. So this was part of the original work, and it has this big bell form hanging under the coiling tower. Anyway, its next life as a public attraction or visitor attraction will be a slide. One does have to, I think, have confidence in the work and let it go in the world. And it has to fight its own space. Doesn't always win, but one has to let it go, like all one's babies. I read in a newspaper an article or a little thing which said that spaces that are haunted and spaces that are spiritual have a particular kind of resonance that makes them haunted and spiritual. So I wondered to myself, in another idiotic moment, I can make that. I'll make a space that's spiritual or haunted. So I tried to find an old house to see if we could make a haunted house. Sorry, I laugh at myself because I'm such a fool. And I began a series of experiments with a sound engineer to see if we could do, what does it take? And it turns out that it's a very low frequency, something like 18 hertz. You know, sound is a sine wave. So when you stretch the sine wave out, and it's a very low, dark sound, apparently it works. But how do you make a low, dark sound in a space? So I decided to just have nothing in a room, just a little light, and with a low, dark, with this low frequency sound. What happened was that it wasn't haunted, and it wasn't spiritual, but it made you feel terribly anxious. But it's interesting, though, because it changes the way you breathe, so you feel anxious. I mean, there were people, I showed this at Nicholas's gallery, at Listen Gallery in London, and Nicholas is sitting here. And there were offices upstairs. They had to move out of the offices upstairs because it made everyone anxious. So the work's called Anxiety. But it's interesting that one can do that, isn't it? That a stupid idea may not be such a stupid idea. That you can, that's the freedom we allow ourselves as artists. We can do anything, and we must be free to do anything, and let the work go where it must go. So I'm going to show you a group of works that I've been making for many, many years. I've hardly shown them, and they are these kind of mad things, which are paintings, or something like paintings. They are made of silicon. They are another kind of interior. Silicon, why do I use silicon? Because it's very bodily. It's a material that has, it's the stuff that breast implants and other body parts are made of. It takes color incredibly. It's the interior. And so I've been exploring these for some time. I've shown them once or twice, and I think I'll show them again. What I'm trying to tell you is that I'm not really interested in being the artist I'm supposed to be. I mean, I'm bored. I want to move on and do the next thing, and I must do it. So this is a work called Interior Objects in 3 Parts. They're very big paintings or reliefs. Anyway, yeah. So, another kind of inside out. I try to make them such that they are not gestural. They're not paintings. They're not about paint. You know, when you have paint, I've made paintings for years, and I could never come to terms with the idea that when you move your hand in a painting, you leave a trace. This stuff, I mix it up in great big cans, you know, great big amounts, and you can. I wait till it's almost set. It's a physical stuff. So I have someone work with me because it's very heavy, but we pick these bits of stuff up. They are huge, you know. They are I don't know, from here to there, big, and we pick them up and put them on the thing. But they have no gesture in them. They are like a fact of a thing, rather than a movement of the body. I'm going to continue to show this. Yeah. I'm tired of myself already. Now, I'm not going to say anything about these 2 works. Let's move on. I want to move on to Dirty Corner. So this is a work, the work I first made called Dirty Corner. It's a dirty corner, and I wanted I keep coming back to architecture, to the idea that human presence in architecture can be left in different ways as a kind of trace. So Dirty Corner's a trace, and then Versailles. The great thing about Lenort, who designed the gardens at Versailles, is that it's a singular vision. A vision, I believe he's one of France's great artists, or was one of France's great artists. But it's so neat and tidy. Everything's this singular perspective, looking down the alley. One might read it politically and, see that it's about a certain kind of domination, about a certain centrality of power, etc. Reminds you of Washington, maybe a little bit. But you know what I mean? This sense of a manicured, a very carefully considered place. I wanted to. What's the point of me decorating Versailles? If I was going to show there, I have to do something that investigates the possibility of meaning in Versailles, in this very ordered landscape. So I decided the first thing I wanted to do was to bring a moment of darkness there. That void, that sits at the center. Versailles is all about these great. Of course, he was the Sun King, Louis XIV, and the whole thing is aligned east-west or west-east, whatever. And the sun moves along, and these huge flat lakes that read like mirrors. So I had to bring darkness there, and then I wanted to turn the earth and put some earth back into it, and put some color, all the things you're not supposed to do. So that's what I did. Made a hole in the ground. The tapis vert, which is where this work is shown, that piece of green lawn, that's the sacred holy ground of Versailles. They've never let an artist touch it, and I kind of anyway, twisted their arm a little bit or something. Anyway, we got there in the end. The work has these very, very big stones around it. To explain the form, it's a long tube with an ear-like opening. That sits on the lawn. And, anyway. It was controversial from the first minute. When I was setting it up, somebody said in not as polite a way as I'm about to say it, they said, "What's that thing doing blocking the view?" So that was the general attitude. What's that effing thing doing blocking the view? Yay, I thought. Fabulous. I'm a schoolboy. No. Anyway, but the important thing for me is that it's a moment of darkness, that in a way it's kind of ritual, that it's sitting there. And I say that she is sitting there, it's the way I described it, with these very big objects. It's about 10 meters, which is 30 feet tall, the central form, and the stones are hundreds of tons with these big red forms around them. I mean, they are very big, and great mounds of earth, and so a kind of cacophony of chaotic, but not far away from the language of gardens. Remember, think of the Italianate grotto. So sitting in there somewhere is the language of gardens, but very bodily, very, and of course within a minute, the moment I said she is sitting on the lawn, reigning supreme, it became Marie Antoinette, and then it became Marie Antoinette's vagina, and oh God, oh no. So weirdly French. We think of them as liberated, but they're not. It is a country of 68, remember, and of great intellectuals and great artists, but also great division. No, I say that with huge admiration. I mean it. I mean it. But huge divisions, and it's interesting that art can be the focus of division. So what happened was one lot of graffiti which I had removed, and then this anti-Semitic, deeply violent, deeply aggressive. I decided to leave it there. I decided that the right thing to do was I'm not going to remove it. I don't care. I'm not going to remove it. It was very provocative of me, and such is the trouble in France that I was asked to go and see the president, Mr. Hollande, who, at least on the face of it, said, for pedagogic reasons, good French phrase, for pedagogic reasons, I understand that you might want to leave this there. Okay, pedagogic reasons, great. Anyway, I got to leave it there. And then someone took out a court case to force Versailles to remove the graffiti because it was a display of anti-Semitic material. So suddenly, we had become the perpetrators of anti-Semitic material. A fabulous French reversal of, well, it is. But I decided that I wasn't going to remove it, whatever. So we had this court case, difficult, very, very difficult, very stressful, difficult thing to deal with. I decided that what I had to do was find an answer, an artistic answer, meaning one that's within the work. I refused to remove it. So this was my answer. To cover it in gold leaf. Partially, not all of it, but enough to, I told you I'm naughty, but enough to mask the words, but not to mask the fact that the graffiti had happened. It's a very hard thing, you know. Winston Churchill, I hate Churchill, but one of the things I like about Churchill is some of the things he said were wonderful. One of the things he said was, never waste a good crisis. Isn't that a fantastic thing to say? Never waste a good crisis. He was a crisis. What a gift. I've become more and more politically active in my dotage, like a fool. Of course, I don't believe that art needs to go there, but I do believe as a citizen, one has a huge amount to do. But I felt this was something I just couldn't let go. I couldn't let go of this affront. While this was going on, they were bombing, or they were destroying Nimrud in Syria. You know, they'd unimaginable. Not one French intellectual, not one artist, not one nobody stood up and said, Mr. Kapoor, you're right to stand up with this. I think that's disgraceful. Sorry. Anyway, but I do believe this is a battle we have to fight, you know, and it won't go away. We do have to fight this battle. Culture matters, and it's weird that art can be a repository for such violence. These are passive, stupid objects. You don't like them, walk away. Why abuse them? Anyway, enough. I quite like my answer, which is covered in gold leaf. Don't forget, of course, that Versailles is gold leaf. It's everywhere. Yeah. Anyway, and since I started with ascension, I'm going to end with descension. This is a work I wanted to make for many years. It's a vortex made in a pool of water that gurgles. I should have put a film on here, but I don't have a film to show you. But it gurgles and goes, it's a deep rumbling, involuted form that I've shown it in various places. This is in India, and this is in Italy, churning and tumbling into itself, the beginning and the end. Thank you.